All right, so today we're doing a deep dive on Lamb Research. And I have to admit, I wasn't too familiar with them before, but we've got this Motley Fool article calling them a must buy. And it really got me thinking. So, Lamb Research, they don't actually make the chips themselves, they make the machines that make the chips, which already sounds pretty important,
Yeah.
right?
It's really interesting how much we rely on these kind of behind-the-scenes companies.
Mm.
Think about our smartphones and computers and even our cars. They all rely on advanced semiconductors and chips. And Lam Research is the company that provides the tools to make those chips.
Okay, so they're like the master craftspeople who make the tools for the whole industry. Sounds like a pretty powerful position to be in. But this article says they're being overlooked, especially compared to like the big tech giants.
Yeah, and the Motley Fool article suggests that they might even be undervalued right now. They point out a few things like how Lam dominates this really specific niche. It's called etch and deposition equipment. And these machines are what creates those tiny transistors on a chip, the billions of transistors on each chip. It's like incredibly precise sculpting, but on a microscopic level.
So basically, we wouldn't have the powerful chips that power like everything these days without Lamb's technology.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is their connection to AI. AI requires some of the most powerful chips, with components stacked vertically, almost like a microscopic skyscraper. And Lam's expertise in etch and deposition is crucial for that.
Hold on, so we're talking self-driving cars and personalized medicine. All this futuristic AI stuff relies on Lamb. That's pretty amazing. But can they turn this technology leadership into actual profit?
Well, that's where Lam really shines. Their financials are consistently strong. They have high operating margins, meaning they keep a lot of their revenue as profit after covering their costs. Imagine if you had a lemonade stand, and for every dollar you made, 80 cents was pure profit. That's what a high operating margin looks like.
Oh, okay, that's a good analogy. I get it. High profit margins are a good thing. What else should we be looking at?
Well, the return on equity, or ROE, is almost 50%. So ROE measures how well a company uses shareholder money to generate profit. Think of it like putting money into a savings account. The interest you earn is like ROE, and 50% is an insanely high interest rate.
So Lamb's like that friend who always seems to pick the best investments. But are they sharing the wealth? Does Lamb return any of that profit to investors?
Yeah, they're actually known for being very shareholder-friendly. They have a solid track record of returning cash to shareholders through things like stock buybacks and dividends. So buybacks are when a company repurchases its own shares. It's like taking a slice of cake and dividing it among fewer people. Each slice gets bigger, right? In this case, each remaining share becomes more valuable. And dividends are like regular cash payments to shareholders, like a bonus for owning a piece of the company. Lam recently boosted their dividend by 15%, which is pretty significant.
Okay, so they're making good money and sharing the wealth. And they're at the heart of some of the most exciting new technologies. Sounds pretty promising. But the article called them a value price, even though they trade at 23 times earnings. That doesn't sound like much of a bargain to me.
I know 23 times earnings might seem high at first glance, but remember, their earnings are expected to rebound as demand for chips continues to increase. And also, their stock has dropped about 35% from its peak in July. That's even steeper than the drop during the COVID pandemic.
35%, wow. Makes you wonder if maybe the market is overlooking their long-term potential. I'm starting to see why this Motley Fool article caught our attention. But before we jump to any conclusions, I think we really need to understand where Lam sits in the overall semiconductor landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about their technology and their profitability and their approach to shareholders. But to get the full picture, we need to look at the factors that drive their growth and what challenges they might face moving forward. When we talk about the semiconductor landscape, it's easy to get caught up in all the hype around AI. And for good reason, AI is going to change a lot of industries. But I think it's really important to understand how Lam Research is positioned to benefit from the AI boom.
Yeah, I'm all ears. We talked about how Lam's technology is crucial for AI, but I want to go deeper. What about their business makes them stand out when it comes to AI?
Okay, well, first let's talk about those vertically stacked chips again. AI algorithms, especially the ones for machine learning and deep learning, they have to process tons of data really quickly. And those 3D chip structures that Lam helps create, those are essential for that kind of performance. It's like upgrading from a single-lane road to a massive superhighway for data.
So Lam is helping to build the infrastructure that will let AI reach its potential. That's pretty impressive. But how much does Lam rely on AI being successful? What if AI doesn't become as big as everyone's saying?
That's a great question, and it highlights Lam's strategy. You see, even if AI doesn't become as widespread as people think, the semiconductor industry is still growing a lot. We're seeing chips in everything now. Electric cars, renewable energy systems, the Internet of Things. Lam is a key part of all that.
So they're not betting everything on AI. Their tech is used all over the semiconductor industry. That's a good sign for investors, right?
Yeah, diversification is really important. But Lam also has a history of innovating. They invest a lot in research and development to stay ahead of the game. That's really important in an industry that moves this fast.
That makes sense. So what about their competition? Who are Lam's rivals?
Oh, that's a great question. The semiconductor equipment market is really competitive. Lam definitely has some rivals. Companies like Applied Materials and ASML. They all want a piece of the pie, but they each kind of specialize in different areas. Like Applied Materials has a wider range of products, and ASML is the leader in a certain type of lithography technology. But Lam has carved out a space for themselves in etch and deposition, and they're known for working with those cutting-edge chip makers.
So it's not like one company takes it all. There's space for a few players, and they each have their own strengths. It's interesting how it all works. But even with all this potential, no investment is without risk. What are some of the challenges Lam might face going forward?
One thing to remember is the semiconductor industry is cyclical. It's known for these periods of boom and bust, based on the ups and downs of supply and demand. We've seen it before. And it can definitely affect even a company as established as Lam. Remember that 35% drop in their stock price we talked about? Part of that was probably because of worries about a slowdown in chip demand.
Oh, I see. So even though chips seem to be on an upward trend in the long run, investors need to be ready for some bumps along the way. Are there any other risks coming up?
Well, there's also the geopolitical situation. The semiconductor industry is more and more tied to global politics, especially with all the tension between the U.S. and China. Governments all over the world are realizing how important semiconductors are. And that could lead to trade restrictions or subsidies or other policies that could affect companies like Lam.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not just about the tech and the money. Politics can have a big impact on the industry's future. So we've got this company with a strong history and a key position in a growing industry. But there are some risks, too. Where do we go from here? What are the key things you want our listener to take away from this?
I think the most important thing is for our listener to understand that Lam Research isn't just riding the AI wave. They're actually shaping it. Their technology is making all these AI advancements possible, and that gives them a big advantage in the future. But like any investment, there are risks. The semiconductor industry's ups and downs, and those global political factors, they can create some challenges.
Right, and that's why we do these deep dives, to give our listeners the information they need to make smart decisions. So as we wrap up our look at Lam Research, what are your final thoughts for our listener, for someone who might be thinking about adding Lam Research to their portfolio?
Well, this Motley Fool article definitely makes a strong case for Lam, but it's just a starting point. I would encourage our listener to go beyond the headlines and do some more research. Look at Lam's financial statements. Read industry reports, compare them to their competitors.
And it's also important to think about your own investment goals and how much risk you're comfortable with. Does Lam Research fit into your overall strategy? Are you okay with the potential ups and downs that come with the semiconductor industry? Those are all things to consider.
Exactly. It's ultimately up to our listener to decide whether to invest in Lam Research. But hopefully, this deep dive has given them the information they need to make a good choice.
It's funny, when we first started talking about Lam Research, I thought we were going to be looking at this really niche technical company, but now I'm seeing how connected they are to everything, AI, smartphones, even global politics. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's one of the things that makes investing so interesting. You start with what seems like a single company, and then you pull on the threads and find all these connections. It reminds you that you're not just investing in a company, you're investing in ideas and trends to future, really.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think for our listeners, that's the real takeaway here. Whether you decide to invest in Lam Research or not, this deep dive should give you a new way to think about investments.
Exactly. It's not about just picking stocks because of headlines or your gut feeling. It's about really understanding what drives value and what the risks are, making smart decisions that line up with your goals.
Right. So to wrap up our deep dive on Lam Research, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. This company is kind of a hidden gem. They're not flashy, they're not always in the news, but they're a big part of shaping the future of technology.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, sometimes the best investments are the ones you have to dig for, the ones that aren't obvious. You have to look beyond the surface to find the companies quietly driving innovation.
I like that. So, for all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, keep diving deep into the world of investing. You never know what you might find.
Happy investing!